According to the leading expert in genetics and psychic phenomenon, Professor Charles Xavier, one can exercise psychic powers by doing this. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it's going to give you a pretty good sense of what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. But in short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. And the subgenre that we're looking at today is psychics. Horror movies about psychics. And this is from our Horror Movie Supplement, which was an additional 100 subgenres to the original 100 subgenres in the Horror Movie Syllabus. And these were a little bit more niche or a little bit more specific or a little bit more whatever, unique to Professor Victor. And this is probably one of those examples where it's just something that I like. These are movies that I tend to find interesting. I like psychic phenomenon. I think it's a cool idea. And in fact, we've talked about several movies on the Horror Movie Syllabus that had psychic powers or psychic characters in the movies. We've looked at Scanners, The Shining, even Final Destination arguably comes to mind. There's been several where there's been some sort of psychic phenomenon or a psychic character that we've looked at before. And of course, we're not going to repeat talking about those here. So if there's a movie that's missing that you think should be here, it's maybe in another video. And if not, you can always leave it in a comment and let me know about it. But this is a situation where this genre, like I said, it's a little bit more specific and maybe a little too specific arguably, because there's also a subgenre on the Horror Movie Supplement called paranormal powers, and this is arguably just a subset of that. This is like the Venn diagram would be one circle and another circle, so this might be a little bit specific. So what I figured I'd do is try to explain just a little bit about what I'm going for here. And what that is I'm trying to look at movies, horror movies, where the main character or one of the characters in the movie is a psychic, and their psychic powers is a key part of the plot, the main part or an essential part of the plot. That's what I'm looking at, rather than focusing too much on like a bunch of psychic phenomenon, things like that. I'm trying to focus on an actual specific psychic character. So that was kind of the way I approached this selection of movies, and how I tried to narrow it down and make it specific. And hopefully that'll become clear as we go on. Like I said, there's lots of movies that have psychic characters, and it's kind of a well-worn trope in horror movies in general. But I think that these movies it'll be clear that these movies with the psychic powers, the psychic character is front and center. And that was, kind of inadvertently, wasn't my intention, but it wound up being that I picked movies where I really liked the psychic character. Like I was drawn to that character for whatever reason. I really resonated with or liked or just appreciated the psychic character in the movie. So you'll notice that as we go on, that the characters are the ones that I tend to gravitate towards or like a lot, are the psychic characters in the movie. So that was another criteria that I didn't go in intending to do, but it wound up being the case when I looked at it. I was like, oh, these are all the movies where I like the character, the lead character who's psychic or whatever. And so that's another aspect of this that kind of shows up. So we're going to go ahead and dive into these, and I'm going to organize them like I usually do, undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate level. And in this case, I'm going to try to put them in order of like which ones I think are the scariest. They're going to get scarier as I go on. And of course, your mileage may vary, but this is my thoughts of what I think is the scarier movies as we go on. So let's go ahead and think about these psychic movies. The first horror movie about psychics that we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is The Gift. The Gift came out in 2000 and was directed by legendary Sam Raimi, and it was co-written by Billy Bob Thornton, which I didn't know till I did the research for this video. And it is a really incredibly well-cast and well-made movie that doesn't seem to get a whole lot of love. In fact, when you say The Gift, most people think about the Jason Bateman, Joel Edgerton movie that we have talked about on the channel before. And this one seems to get kind of forgotten about a little bit. And it's a shame, because I think it's an exceptional movie that definitely deserves more love and more eyeballs. So we're going to go ahead and dive into it. First, if you haven't seen it before, The movie is about a single mother in rural Georgia who is a psychic and does psychic readings for the community, including a battered wife and a mentally challenged man who's a mechanic. And one day she gets a vision of a missing girl, and it's a pretty ghastly vision. And she decides to try to help out with finding the girl. But of course, she winds up getting embroiled in a mystery that is disturbing to say the least. And we'll go ahead and just stop there so as to not spoil the movie for anybody. But the mystery of the movie is a key factor in it, but maybe it shouldn't be. But we'll get into that in a little bit. The other key thing about this movie is its pedigree. Like I mentioned, that Sam Raimi is the director, Billy Bob Thornton co-writer on this, and so it's already got really great talent behind the camera, but it's also got really amazing talent in front of the camera as well. The lead character, the psychic woman, is Cate Blanchett, who is always good, of course. It's also got Greg Kinnear, Keanu Reeves, Hilary Swank, Katie Holmes, J.K. Simmons pops up in a small role, Kim Dickens, Gary Cole, lots of familiar faces, lots of A-level talent. It's a really gangbusters cast, and it's important because, A, it gives you the impression that the movie is a legitimate, real Hollywood movie. It's not got some low budget fare. It's not Evil Dead, frankly. It's not Sam Raimi scraping together money to make a movie. He's making a big budget Hollywood feature, and it shows. The money's on the screen in terms of the talent, and B, because the talent is bringing their A games. Cate Blanchett's always great. Kate's always great, and so she's doing, her rural Georgia thing here, which is nice to see. Like the very convincing accent, very convincing performance, and she is a very likable character who you really are rooting for. She's got a tough life. She's trying to manage a lot of stress, and she doesn't really want to be the way she is, and she doesn't want to really get involved in the things she's getting involved in. But it just keeps happening to her, and she's kind of put upon, and you really kind of feel for her. Again, this is the situation where I was really gravitating towards the psychic character. I really liked the character that Kate played in the movie, and it's just a very sympathetic character that you feel for. But the rest of the cast is bringing their A game too. It's like they're all trying to match her level, and I don't really know that there's a weak link in the bunch. Greg Kinnear is doing really solid work as the guy whose fiance is missing, and Katie Holmes playing his fiance. Now, I know not everybody loves Katie Holmes. I'm a big Katie Holmes fan. More on that in a second. But it's Keanu Reeves that really takes the cake here. Keanu Reeves plays an abusive husband. He's the abusive husband of Hilary Swank's character. Hilary Swank, of course, doing great work. She's also really great always. And Keanu Reeves is just terrifying in this movie. He is disturbingly terrifying in this movie. It is one of the best performances I've ever seen him give. And I know that's not saying much because usually when Keanu stretches, you get things like Bram Stoker's Dracula, right? But he's stretching here because, everybody knows Keanu Reeves is like the nicest guy in the world. So he's doing something very different than what he is in real life and very different than what we've seen in other movies. And it's chilling how good he is in this movie. He is deeply, deeply scary in this movie. I find him to be really terrifying, very authentic, very, very convincing. And then you got Giovanni Ribisi kind of doing his Ribisi thing, where he plays somebody mentally challenged. And they kind of made a career of that, really. And he's doing a really good job of it here. And his insertion in the movie lends a certain wild card aspect to it, where you don't really know what's going to happen. And so you've got these characters, like J.K. Simmons comes up as a cop, and in small role, but it's memorable because it's J.K. Simmons, of course. You've got these actors doing their thing and making the characters feel memorable, noteworthy, noticeable, authentic, lived in. You really kind of get into this world because all the performances are kind of drawing you in to this world, and then you've got this mystery that is, okay, so admittedly, I don't remember when I saw this movie when it came out. I was there opening night, and I don't remember if I solved the mystery early when I first saw it. But when I rewatched it for this video, I think the mystery might be a little easy to solve. It may not be that compelling. It might be a little too simple to guess who done it. And if you were to say that, I would not disagree with you on that. I think that might be part of why this movie doesn't really get a lot of critical love and didn't really find its audience super well either. Like, it's really set up as a whodunit, but in reality, what the focus should be and kind of is on the characters. It's kind of a character study. It's kind of this slow burn story that's a kind of a character study where you're kind of like mired in all of these characters' lives and how they're intersecting and stuff. But I don't know that it really pays off in that sense. And I also don't know that the mystery's resolution is all that satisfying either. So that might be why people don't talk about it these days, but I love it. And when I rewatched it, I still loved it. Okay, so I'll admit my confession here. I was a big Katie Holmes fan back in the day. I watched Dawson's Creek, the whole thing. Loved Katie Holmes, like my favorite actress. And I knew she was in this, which is why I went to go see it opening day. And so Katie Holmes plays the missing fiance, and there's some flashback scenes and stuff like that. And there's a scene where Katie Holmes is nude. She does nudity in this, which a young Professor Victor was pretty excited about that. That right off the bat put this movie on the map for me. I remember going to see it with my roommate, and she was just like, like she knew I was going to love this movie immediately, and I did. But the thing is, that wasn't the only reason. The movie as a whole just really drew me in. All the performances. Katie Holmes is good in this movie. Everybody's good in this movie, and that really drew me in. And I remember really liking the mystery and liking the psychic aspect of it, and following how Cate Blanchett was managing all these psychic visions she would have and what she needed to do to help solve the mystery without basically being branded a witch. There's this whole aspect where people are afraid of her power because it's rural Georgia and everything. Fascinating movie. Loved it. And again, I find it hard to believe that people don't like it more. I think it's great. I think it's one of Sam Raimi's best, and that's saying a lot. But I am apparently in the minority on this one. So if you've seen it and love it too, please let me know in the comments below, because I think a lot of people have just kind of forgotten about this one. I don't think people hate it. I don't think people think it's a bad movie. I think people just it just didn't make the impression on them that it did on me. Maybe they're not as big a Katie Holmes fans. I don't know. I have a hard time believing that at the very minimum that Keanu Reeves didn't make an impression on everybody, because Keanu Reeves alone is a reason to see this movie. So if you haven't seen it, I would very much recommend this one. Again, it's a little bit of a slow burn, may not be the most compelling mystery. You might guess it early, but just pay attention to the character work. Like, I didn't even talk about Hilary Swank and how good she is in this movie. It's really fantastic character work by all the actors. Very much worth your time. So check it out if you haven't already seen it. The next horror movie about psychics that we're looking at today, the graduate level selection, is Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep came out in 2019 and was written and directed by Mike Flanagan, savior of modern horror. I love Mike Flanagan. He never does me wrong, and he didn't do me wrong here, even though you would think this was a potentially really dumb idea because it's a sequel to The Shining. And what a stupid idea it is to try to make a sequel to one of the greatest horror movies of all time. Why would you do that? Why would you even think to do that? That's a really terrible idea. Except that it wasn't. And we're going to get into it. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie takes place years later after The Shining has happened, and it is the story of an adult Danny who is struggling with what has happened to him in the previous movie, and he's suffering from alcoholism and just trying to get his life back together. And as he starts to get his life back together, he winds up getting connected with a young girl who also has the same shining ability, psychic ability that he has, and he needs to help her as she's tackling these psychic vampires, for lack of a better way of putting it, and hijinks abound, of course, but we're going to stop there and not spoil the movie as usual. But this movie has no business being as good as it was. I was shocked. When this movie came out, I didn't really want to see it because I love The Shining, and I just thought it was a cash grab, terrible idea. And I know it's based on a Stephen King book of the same name that came out a few years before. He was kind of going back to The Shining well, and they were making an adaptation of that. And at the time, I wasn't really dialed into Mike Flanagan. Had I known at the time who Mike Flanagan was and was really absorbing all of that, I would have had complete faith. Like, Flanagan's going to be doing an Exorcist remake, and I'm down for that, even though it sounds like a terrible idea, because it's the Flan man. In Flan we trust, but back then I didn't know that. So I'm just thinking, horrible idea, but Ewan McGregor, aka Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I was interested for that. And that was kind of like, well, maybe I'll check that out. But I thought it would be bad. And then the reviews were coming out, and they were extremely good. And it had a strong other supporting cast. It had, Rebecca Ferguson and Cliff Curtis and stuff like that. And, I just wound up going to go see it. Couldn't believe it. couldn't believe how well made this movie is. Not just from a directorial standpoint, it's well paced, it's well written, it's got, a really good aesthetic to it, but also because it both it interprets Stephen King's book or books because of The Shining and the Kubrick movie as well. It kind of married them together in a way that I wouldn't have thought would be possible. Now, fans of The Shining and fans of horror kind of know Stephen King hates the Kubrick version of The Shining. He even did his own TV movie version of it that's terrible. He just never really took to the Kubrick version, and I think a large part of it is because Kubrick really abandoned certain pieces of the novel and kind of made his own thing, and King really doesn't like when you do that, period, but he really didn't like that he left out some of the themes about family breakdown and alcoholism and stuff like that. He didn't really dive into those the way King would have liked, and so I think that for Flanagan, having to kind of thread that needle of a book that does not align with Kubrick's movie, and also trying to keep Kubrick's iconic movie in mind and putting all that into one work was a stiff challenge, and he was up to the task. He managed to weave in all these other themes that were in the original book of The Shining that didn't got short shrift or didn't really get focused on in Kubrick's movie, and kind of focus on them here to make Stephen King happy, really. And then also draw in some of the really key iconography from the Shining movie, the imagery of the twins, the bloody elevator, the ghosts, the hotel, all of that stuff is in this movie, and he kind of makes it all work. He weaves it together in a way that you wouldn't have thought was possible, but it was. He did it, and he manages to tell the story probably well too. Now I haven't read Doctor Sleep, and I've heard it's okay. I've heard it's not bad. I've heard it's not great. It's okay, but I like that Flanagan has told a story, and apparently it's King's story, that was worth telling. Why go back to The Shining? Why go back to The Well other than to make money? Well, he came up with this cool idea of these psychic vampires that drink in the steam of psychic, children usually. It's interesting. They're pretty creepy. It's led by Rebecca Ferguson, who is a wonderful actor, and it's this cast of characters, including like Carol Struycken is in there, a couple other recognizable faces, and they're creepy. They're creepy, and they kill children, which is really creepy. And this one psychic girl winds up kind of dialing into what's going on there, and then of course she becomes a target. And that's Kylie Curran. I think I'm saying her name right, and she's wonderful in this. She really centers this movie because you've got Ewan McGregor, who's kind of a bit of a mess for part of the movie, and then he's kind of getting his stuff back together again. And the connection between the two of them is really quite charming and wonderful. She's like this little 13-year-old girl doing a really excellent job in the movie. And the partnership between her and Danny Torrance, Ewan's character, is really cool. And just like this idea that there's like this kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, community of psychics out there, and how they're kind of sort of interconnected but also separate, and then there's this caravan of people hunting them. It's all a really cool idea. It was like a good movie to have a standalone movie from, but then Flanagan bringing in aspects of The Shining was fantastic. Now, I'm going to admit, there's some things that kind of distracted me a little bit. Like, he recasted characters from The Shining to do flashbacks. He recasted Shelley Duvall. He recasted Jack Nicholson. And on the one hand, it's a little distracting to see somebody else playing those roles. On the other hand, they do a really good job of playing the roles. They do a really good job of, without being caricature-y, of being the same characters. So I let it slide. It's not that bad. I think I prefer that to doing like a CGI de-aging thing or something like that. I think this is a better idea. It looks good. It's fine, and it's not a big part of the movie. But it is nice to have the tie-ins to The Shining. But it never feels like a member berries. Like, oh, hey, remember this? It never feels like just kind of ham-fisted references and nostalgia trip. It really feels like there's a reason for tying in the Shining aspects of the movie into this one. And it winds up kind of going to the Shining book for an ending. All of this working really, really well. Now, the movie's a little bit long, and I think that might have been why it doesn't do so well in the box office. Like I said, critics loved it, but audiences didn't go see it. And maybe their attitude was just like mine. Like, why would you want to see this sequel, the Shining sequel? Why would you want to see that? Like, why would you do that? And not realizing it actually winds up being extremely good. But it didn't make any money. And again, some people cited because it's length, and then they made a director's cut, which is even longer. So it's like 2 hours and 35 minutes or something like that. But that's the one to see, actually. I think that gives it even more time to develop the characters and let the story breathe a little bit. So when I revisited for this channel, for the video, I watched the director's cut, which I hadn't seen before, and it's better. it's good if you've got the patience for it, you know? Because again, it's a little bit of another slow burn story, but there's enough going on to keep you engaged and keep you in there. And like I said, the psychic vampires, which I don't know if that's really what I call it. That's what I'm calling them. They are cool. They are an interesting, creepy idea, and the whole thing works for me. And it shouldn't have, and that's why it's here. This movie, if you haven't seen, if you haven't given it a chance because it's a Shining sequel, give it a chance. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised with how good it wound up being. I was. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. And of course, if you have, let me know your thoughts because I'm pretty effusive on this one. I think a lot of people are. Maybe you're not. That's okay. We can talk about it in the comments below. And our last horror movie about psychics, the postgraduate level selection, is Oddity. Oddity came out in 2024, pretty recently, and it was written and directed by a man named Damian McCarthy, who I am not familiar with, but he did a movie called Caveat that had some buzz behind it. He's an Irish director, and this movie Caveat that came out previously, I've never seen it before, but after seeing this one, I definitely want to go check out because he's made kind of a bit of a modern horror masterpiece here, and I absolutely love it. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about this psychic blind woman whose sister has been murdered, and she is getting impressions from her psychic abilities when she can touch things and get impressions, and trying to solve the murder mystery, if you will. Meanwhile, the woman's husband or widow, at this point, a widower, is moving on, and that doesn't really sit super well with the sister as well. So when she goes to visit, stuff starts to happen and she's got a bit of a plan and it may not go according to plan, but I'm going to stop there and not to spoil it, even though it's been, even that synopsis is a little bit of a jumbled mess. And that's just because I'm trying to sidestep telling too much of the story because I do feel like the less you know about this movie, the better, but I still need to talk about it and I want to talk about it. So we're going to kind of tread lightly, I guess. But first things first, the movie is beautifully shot. Absolutely beautifully shot. Like the atmosphere in this movie is thick. Like I said, I want to see McCarthy's other movie, Caveat, because I just love the way this one looks and the feel of the tone and the mood that he sets right from the beginning. Because this movie has an opening scene that is chilling. It is so good and so tense and creepy and unsettling. It's it's very different from the opening of Scream, but in terms of like greatest horror movie openings ever, it's right up there for me. It's right up there for me. The movie grabbed me right from the beginning with that opening scene. It's just done so well. And part of it is it's like this the way this movie's lit, the location they picked, this remote, isolated house that's very creepy and has a personality all its own, really. It's a really fantastic location, and they use it to maximum effect by lighting it really well, by having the camera move really well in the space, and kind of setting the space up for you earlier on so that it pays off for you later. And then just the pacing of this movie is really, I mean, it's kind of languid. I'll admit it might feel like a little slow to some people, but I feel like it's just letting that unfold naturally and kind of letting tension ratchet up a little bit, making some of the early scenes awkward because of the interpersonal relationship aspect of it. But then underlying that, this sense of dread that you know what you're watching a horror movie, you know something's going to go awry and you're just not quite sure how or when. I think it lets that move, the movie lets that feeling kind of just simmer for a while. And it winds up being really cool. And by the time you get to the mannequin, then things start to really make sense because they've got a mannequin in this movie that again, I won't spoil the movie too much, but there's a mannequin that the blind psychic woman has that is super creepy looking and of course plays into things. It's just a really unsettling thing. And in doing the research for this video, I saw a little bit the filmmakers were really interested in the idea of like killer dolls and how they can be so small that they don't seem that threatening. So they wanted to have like a life-size mannequin, a big killer doll, if you want to kind of put a twist on that kind of feeling to it. But then to call this a killer doll movie, well, that's a little bit of a misleading thing. Let's just say you might think I'm spoiling things. Maybe I'm not. Let's just put it that way. But the movie doesn't have necessarily the most deep or surprising mystery, but it's a serviceable mystery. It's perfectly fine. I had my ideas of how things were going to go, and I don't think I was 100% right, but I wasn't 100% wrong either. But the mystery, again, wasn't what was driving this movie for me. It was the mood and atmosphere and tone, and then the lead character, the psychic woman, who is really cool. I just love her character. Again, this was what kind of was driving selections for this video, was just like how much I liked the character who was the psychic. And she's just great. She's got this sassiness about her and this gravitas, but also like this playful impishness. She's a little bit of a B word, you know what I mean? And intentionally, she's just kind of a little salty, a little sassy, and I really really like her in this movie. And she actually plays a dual role because she's playing, she's got the twin sister who has died, and so she plays both roles. But she's really great, and she's a big part of what I liked about this movie. And then just the way it unfolds, it really, to me, wound up ratcheting up the tension and the creep factor by just visual storytelling. It's just shot so well and looks so good that, it's mostly a single location, and they play with that location so well, and they've established the characters and how they relate to one another so well that when everything starts happening, it works for me. And then it's got a really great ending, a good slap in the face ending that a lot of people talk about liking, and I'm one of them. I really dig the way this movie ends as well. This is why the movie wound up on my top 10 of 2024 list. I loved it. I thought it was great, and I'm not the only one. The critics love this movie too. I know not everybody was feeling this one. I know that some people were kind of like meh about Oddity. Like when my top 10 of 2024 list came out, some people were kind of meh about this one, and that's fine. That's cool. It may not be for everybody, but given the location, the acting, the performances, and just the way that the story unfolded, it really hit well for me. And I could see why a lot of people really loved it. A lot of people thought it was very creepy and scary. I thought it was creepy and scary, so I was down for this one. Let me know your thoughts on this one. I think a lot of you probably saw this one and have opinions on it. Again, it's okay if your opinions vary. I'm down for that, having a conversation. If you didn't love it, let me know. But if you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend checking it out. And just like I said, the less you know, the better. I've probably told too much already. So maybe I'll just shut up now and let you find out for yourself how good Oddity is. Okay, that's it for our exploration into horror movies about psychics. But I've got a few extra credit movies to check out too, because like I said, I tend to like the psychic phenomenon thing. I like these kind of characters. I like these kind of movies. So I've got a few extra ones to talk about here. The first one we're going to go into is Dreamscape. And Dreamscape came out in 1984 and stars Dennis Quaid. And I remember this one as a kid. I really enjoyed this one when I was a kid in the 80s seeing this. And I'll admit, I rewatching it for this video, maybe not everything holds up super well on this one, but I still felt like it merited a discussion, that there was enough meat on the bone to talk about here and just kind of mention it as an extra credit. Now, if you haven't seen it before, Dennis Quaid plays a psychic man who can enter into people's dreams, and he's a bit of a ne'er-do-well, and he was in a study before, but he's kind of gone off from that, and now he's like kind of a gambler and a womanizer, and he gets brought back into the study to try to help out with these dream issues that are plaguing people with nightmares, and maybe there's somebody who's trying to perhaps weaponize dreams, and if he can help that, he might be able to save the day, he might be able to save the country, he might even be able to save the world. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, of course, and not spoil it, but the movie's plot is admittedly a little bit more actiony and sci-fi than it is horror, and it's got some horror aspects to it, but it really is a little bit light on the horror, if I'm being honest, which was another reason why I was debating whether or not to even include it here. But again, my fondness for it as a kid really resonated, and it's not that it's a bad movie, it's really just that like the dream sequences, the psychic plane of dream sequences look a little dated. They do. And story-wise, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek or slightly campy maybe, but it's got such a good pedigree there. Like I already mentioned Dennis Quaid, who's doing great work here. He's, in his, prime right in this movie. And then you've got Max von Sydow in here. You've got Christopher Plummer and Kate Capshaw, and just a really strong cast of characters. Chris Mulkey shows up from Twin Peaks, like recognizable names like that. And so it's fun to watch these people, like when they're younger, again, kind of in their prime, doing good work, and it was fun. It was almost kind of nostalgic in a way for me, and I'll admit nostalgia might be driving a lot of this, but I still think it's a fun story. Now, admittedly, it kind of is a little reminiscent of Scanners in some way, with this government agency who's trying to weaponize psychic powers and stuff like that. But it's very different from Scanners, Cronenberg and everything like that. This is a lot more mainstream, and for better and for worse, I suppose. But it's a fun ride. It never really gets dull. Like I said, it might be a little cheesy, especially by today's standards and with today's aesthetics. But I think there's enough charm in the cast, especially Dennis Quaid, to overcome that. And there's enough of a fun story here to keep you engaged and keep you interested in what's going on. a lot of the hijinks aren't really scary per se. They're really more, like I said, like kind of action or even action comedy in some sense. Like there's a lot of stuff with like bookies that are chasing him and stuff like that. And it's like I said, it's kind of silly and campy, but it works. It's entertaining and it's fun, and I have a good time with it. And even though the psychic dream stuff looks a little shaky by today's standards, it's still really imaginative and interesting. And again, like I said, as a kid, that was the stuff that really stood out to me. That was the stuff that I really, really liked and enjoyed, and which made this movie memorable to me. But going back to now, yeah, it doesn't look as good now, but I do still think it's really neat looking and really cool stuff and really interesting ideas. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, like plot wise, the dream stuff. It's a bit of a stretch. You're just gonna have to roll with it a little bit, but it's imaginative, it's interesting, and so I felt like this one really warranted mentioning here and talking about. And I don't know how many of you have seen this, and it does seem like it has a bit of its cult following. It does seem like it does still get talked about occasionally, but it's not like a huge must see for people. People don't revere this one the way they do some of the other movies that we've talked about, or even other movies that that deal with psychic powers and stuff like that. So this one I'm recommending to you guys to check out if you've never seen it before. But I'd be curious to see what you guys think, especially if you're a little on the younger side. Like, does this work for you? Like, if it's not hitting nostalgia buttons, does it work for you? Because I'd be curious to know if this one is just me being really nostalgic. So let me know that in the comments below. Now, the next extra credit movie I want to mention is a movie called Incarnate. And Incarnate came out in 2016. It was directed by somebody named Brad Payton, who I'm not super familiar with, except that he's done a lot of like action movie type stuff. And that kind of tells you a little bit this movie is a little bit more on the action tip on this, but there is definitely horror aspects in this for sure. And there's definitely a psychic aspect to this as well. And yeah, I admit it up front, it's not a great movie. It's not a great movie, but I really enjoy it. So again, I was going to bring it up because I feel like talking about it. So if you haven't seen it before, Aaron Eckhart plays a psychic man who's lost his family in a car accident and has now dedicated his life into exorcising demons from people using his psychic abilities. And then he winds up getting recruited by the church to help him with an exorcism that might be the demon that was responsible for causing the accident of his family, which puts him on a mission, but it might make his motivations a little impure and make him put things at risk and put the people at risk, in particular, this young kid who's been possessed. And I'm going to go ahead and stop there, of course, and not spoil it. But the movie is kind of a fun setup. The idea that Aaron Eckhart, as this guy, he's in a wheelchair from this accident, he's wearing a terrible, terrible wig, and he's, kind of burned out, broken man, but he's on this mission to use his powers, his psychic powers, for good, because he saw that the person who killed his family in the car accident was possessed by a demon, and he's been hunting this demon ever since. It's really cool, and it's cool for me because it's taking the possession subgenre, which I love, and then adding this psychic powers, this psychic character to it that I also love. It's really making it to this fun new thing. That's not the only time it's ever been done before. It's not even it's not the first time. It's not necessarily super original, but it's fun, and it knows that it's fun. It knows that it's trying to have a good time with this. It's trying to be kind of fun. It's admittedly a little campy, but it's not shying away from the camp, but it's not playing into it either. It's playing it serious, but that's what's making it kind of work for me. Like, Aaron Eckhart is being dead serious on this, but he's so almost laughable with his terrible wig, unless you're seeing him in the psychic world where he looks all handsome and nice haircut and everything like that. And then he's just so angsty and everything like that. And he's got this cast of characters that are also just dead serious, but it's so melodramatic and kind of campy, kind of fun. And that's how I feel with this. If you go in trying to take this too seriously, you're probably going to have a bad time. It really warrants just letting it happen to you, just enjoying it and going along for the ride. Like the technological aspects of how Aaron Eckhart is able to enter into their psyche by connecting to this stuff and all this, technical scientific equipment that he uses to amplify his power and get into their heads and try to get the demon out of them and convince them that they're in this weird psychic loop and that they have to break so that the demon can get out. It's all nonsense, right? It's like it's all like psycho babble, techno babble, and just roll with it. Have a good time, And then like most of the actors are actually decent enough. Like nobody's doing amazing work here. Like even Aaron Eckhart is not particularly great here, and in particular the kid who gets possessed in the movie is not doing great here. Like he's no Reagan from The Exorcist. He's no Linda Blair. He's not terribly compelling. He's not terribly creepy. He's given it his all. The kid's given it his all, but he's just not creepy or intimidating at all. So like none of this is gonna scare you. None of this is gonna impress you in that way. but I love the concept behind it. I think it's a fun idea, and I think it may be slightly underbaked, but not that much underbaked. I think that, it's obviously a low budget movie. I think it's Blumhouse. I think it's like Blumhouse Tilt. So they didn't have a lot of money to work with, but it's really still kind of giving its all for what it's got, right? They got a decent actor in the lead role, even though, I guess Thomas Jane was busy, so they got Aaron Eckhart. But it's really just not trying to be anything more than it actually is. Well, that's not true. It is trying to be more than it is, but that's what makes it fun. Like seeing everybody take this super seriously and trying to make this really deep movie that has emotional aspects to it and emotional ties to it, and kind of coming up just short, not failing miserably, but just coming up a little bit short. For me, it just works. I don't know why, but I enjoy this movie. And again, it's up my alley, right? It's possession movie and psychics, so it's hitting a sweet spot for me. But it really is something that I can acknowledge is not objectively good, but I have a really good time with it. So I figured I'd mention it here. Again, not a great movie. Not trying to say that it is, but it's a good time and I enjoy it. And I think that it does do a few things well in terms of concepts and ideas that land for me, that I can forgive all the other stuff or just kind of let it wash over me and just kind of chuckle at it or smile at it and understand that it's a movie that's not amazing, but it's still something that was worth my time. So hopefully it's worth your time too. If you check it out, please let me know what you think. I know not a lot of people have seen this one. I don't think it's beloved by anybody, and I don't even think I love it really. I just think it's fun. So I thought I'd let you guys know, and hopefully you'll join the ride with me. And the last extra credit movie I want to talk about is The Psychic. The Psychic came out in 1977 and is directed by Lucio Fulci. And it was also known as Seven Notes in Black in Italian. And it is not necessarily what you think of when you think of Fulci. It is very different from his oeuvre and what he's famous for, to its benefit and to its detriment, I think. But we're going to get into all that as we talk about it in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a psychic woman who gets a vision of a woman dying in the house that her fiance has just bought. And it is a mystery to figure out, is this woman going to be in danger or is she already dead? And as they find a body, things start to get really interesting, and the mystery winds up unfolding, and she winds up potentially being in some serious danger from all kinds of different things. And I'm going to stop there, even though what I'm telling you is vague as hell, and I know that, but that's because this is a giallo movie. Even though it's a kind of a subdued giallo movie, it's a giallo movie, and so I don't want to spoil the mystery too much, but it's also a giallo movie, like many giallo movies, where the mystery is kind of a little convoluted, kind of a little weird, and this is no exception to that. And adding the psychic aspect to it makes it even more so. So it's a little bit of a hard plot to track. Not that it's hard to follow. Like, I think if you watch the movie, you'll understand what happens and everything like that. But it's a little hard to boil it down in a way that makes sense without spoiling. And I'm trying not to spoil it, of course. But really what I want to talk about is Lucio Fulci, because, fans of the channel or just fans of horror who know Lucio Fulci know that he is famous more for like gory stuff, like really gory, violent stuff. His gore and kind of the exploitation type stuff that he does is really famous. And we talked about him a couple times, I think, on the channel. We talked about like Zombie 2, for example. And there's a lot of stuff about his movies, that are memorable for gore scenes. And that's not happening here. There's very minimal gore in this movie completely. It really is more of like a mystery movie giallo. And like I said, I called it a subdued giallo because it doesn't really have that total giallo feel to it, but it does have hints of it, like aspects of it. Like some of the color work in this is very much giallo feeling, and some of the pacing feels like giallo, and of course the mystery aspect of it and the different strange characters who might be menacing and stuff like that. But it doesn't have all the tropes. It doesn't have like your masked man and all that stuff. It doesn't feel like a slasher movie. And I guess that's what I'd say is giallos have that kind of slasher aspect to it that this one doesn't exactly have, kind of has it, but doesn't completely have. Again, I'm getting to the point where I'm trying not to spoil things too much, but it really is interesting to see Fulci doing this one, and considering what he's famous for, considering what he's known for with zombies and things like that, and gore, to see this, a very different type of movie, it's a refreshing change because it is kind of a mature movie that's taking itself seriously and kind of telling an interesting story, and it's showing off a little bit more of his aspect as a filmmaker without relying on gore gag effects. But it also, as a result, feels a little bit slow. And if you come in thinking you're going to get a Fulci movie, you're kind of not getting that. And as a result, I'll be honest with you, this one's not my favorite Fulci movie. I don't love this movie, but it does have a bit of a reputation for exactly what I'm talking about. Like not for the story, the mystery is, it's not great. The ending, it's okay. It's an okay ending, right? But it's a lesser loved Fulci movie, but there's still people who love it. There's still fans of this one, partly because of it's a kind of an outlier in the Fulci oeuvre. And I can understand that. I respect that. In fact, I kind of like it for that reason too. It's one of the most noteworthy things about this is it's a Fulci movie that doesn't feel like a Fulci movie. And so that's why we're talking about it. But it's also worth your time. It's by no means a bad movie. It's like I said, not one of my favorites. It's a little bit slow at times, and maybe it doesn't quite pay off. I don't know. That's a debate. I'd say it kind of pays off, but that might be a debate. And again, a debate that you have to get into spoilers for. So maybe we talk about that in the comments or something. But it really is worth your time. And like I said, if you're a student of film, if you're horror films and Fulci in particular, it's kind of a must see to see that kind of different work that he's done and his abilities. He's famous for a certain thing, but to see his talent as a filmmaker beyond that, this movie is a pretty straightforward movie. Like I said, minimal gore. There's, again, a couple gore scenes that are kind of funny more than anything, but for the most part, this one's just a more mystery and giallo without so much blood. And it's interesting. It's an interesting movie to watch. So that's what we're talking about, even though it's not my favorite. If it's your favorite, let me know. Of course, talk to me in the comments about it. But I have a feeling that most Lucio Fulci fans probably aren't raving about this one as their favorite, but it has its champions. So if you're one of them, let's talk about it in the comments below. So that's going to do it for our discussion about horror movies about psychics. Like I said, I had a lot of fun with this one. I really enjoy these movies. I enjoy the characters in the movies, and that's a large part of what draws me to them. So let me know your thoughts on that too. Do you like these kinds of characters? Do you like these kind of movies, or are they not really for you? Let me know about all that in the comments below. And also let me know if there's any other movies that I didn't talk about here that maybe you think should have been on the list. Put them down in the comments below. For now, I'm going to go ahead and get into a Horror Trivia Pursuit card. It's that time where I try to use my powers, and they're not psychic powers, to look at a card and answer it here live on camera and see if I can test my professor knowledge, if you will, on horror trivia. And because this is about paranormal powers, psychic powers, we're going to go with the paranormal category on the card. And the question is this: what is the name of the vengeful entity that emerges from a well in 2002's The Ring? So this is one that I do know. And I normally don't do well with names, like character names. If you watch the channel a lot, I talk about this a lot, that I don't do super well with character names. But there are certain ones that stand out. They're kind of, well-known, in the horror zeitgeist, whatever, pop culture. So some stand out. This one stands out a little bit, in particular because it's not the same as the Japanese version. That many of you know that The Ring was an American remake of a Japanese film called Ringu, and the characters are different names. And in the Japanese movie, her name is Sadako. And that is not the case here in this movie because she's not Japanese. And so that's just kind of a noteworthy thing that kind of sticks out. And I've talked a lot about The Ring, both the American version and the Japanese version. So, we've talked about that on the channel before. So I just happened to retain this knowledge. I happen to remember this. I do remember that the actor who plays this character, DeVay Chase, I remember her name because I remember actor names for whatever reason better than I remember character names. But I'm guessing a lot of you know the answer to this because The Ring is super popular. It's a really well-known, well-loved film for good reason. It's an excellent film. Like I said, we talked about it on the channel already. Naomi Watts, really well-made Gore Verbinski film. Like, it's really a good movie. Very, very good movie. So I'm betting a lot of you have seen it, are familiar with it, and have opinions on it and everything. And share those in the comments, of course. But I'm guessing a lot of you also know the name. So lock your answer in. I'm going to give my answer. I've prattled on long enough. Lock it in. Ready? Okay. So my answer is, of course, Samara. Samara was the name of the entity that's in the well, the little girl who got thrown down the well and is now haunting everybody through the videotape. So it's Samara, and the card says Samara. Samara, played by DeVay Chase. And so, yeah, that one stuck out to me as a name I remember. I think that makes it kind of an iconic name, or like, a well-known name, maybe not as much as like, Michael and Jason and Freddy, but kind of up there on that level. So let me know. Did you get it right? Did you guess something else? Did you guess Sadako? Because you shouldn't have. I told you that was not the right answer. But let me know your wrong answers in the comments below. And again, let me know cool psychic movies to check out in the future. Maybe we'll make a video about those. But until then, I'm just going to say, class dismissed.